Joseph Albers wrote, "To design is to plan and to organize, to order, to relate and to control." The elements of design are the building blocks of which designs are made. They are the tool that the artist uses to compose, and the artist composes to communicate their ideas or their emotions. The elements of design are the foundation of visual communication. The elements of design start with line, shape, texture, value, and color. Color I'm going to talk about more in depth in a separate lecture, but all of these other points we'll talk about today. Combine the elements of design and basic composition that composes the basis of Arts 122, two-dimensional design. One of the most basic elements of design, a line. A line is a point in space. It's a connection between 2 points. It's an implied connection between points. It's all of these things. It's a mark with length greater than width. Lines can be horizontal, vertical, diagonal, straight or curved, thick or thin. The simple act of drawing a line can be the centerpiece of a work of art. Marcel Duchamp understood this, and by affixing his name, the artist's name, to the sheet of paper, which contained a few roughly drawn parallel lines, he claimed that drawing a simple line was art. More recently, Tom Marione's 1972 performance, "Drawing a Line as Far as I Can Reach," suggests that the deliberate act of drawing itself is the art, not necessarily its outcome. Lines can be bold and expressive. They can display personality. They can be representational, that is, art that represents something recognizable. And you see this portrait created by Henri Matisse. Lines can display space and volume. Connected lines form shapes. Lines can be organic or geometric. Here's that painting put into practice as we see it in action now on the sides of these buildings in The Hague. They've become part of the built human environment. Lines can display energy and movement. And you see in these repeated contour lines in this photograph by Etienne Jules Moire. Moire was a 19th century French physiologist. He was studying human movement. To create a piece like this, he took a model and placed reflective lines along the arms and legs and head of that model with points and lines in between. Notice that they're dressed in black as well. Then in the photograph, he basically took the camera shutter and left it open, had the runner run across in a dark room with a strobe light firing on and off, on and off, on and off. So what you're seeing in these individual lines, for example, you can see the foot, the lower leg, the knee, up to the hip, and the torso and head, etc., as the runner runs across, and you have this regular light firing on and off, on and off, on and off at a high speed. These photographs were influential in Marcel Duchamp creating this famous painting, Nude Descending a Staircase. While we look back at this painting as a turning point in art, many artists and the general public at the time that it was displayed were scandalized by the abstraction. But it's the repetition of contour lines that create the sense of energy and movement in this image. This is a case of science influencing art to look at new ways to depict movement. Lines can be delicate. They're used here in a hanging three-dimensional art piece by Alexander Calder. Lines can be organic and are found in nature, as you see in this Harry Callahan 1943 photograph of weeds in the snow. Line networks, like contour lines, can create energy, movement, and can define spaces or objects. You see that here in this fanciful suggestion by Paul Klee of a rock-cut temple. The contour lines here in Bridget Riley's artwork creates a dizzying sensory experience. I was in Edinburgh, Scotland in the summer of 2019. Riley was having a retrospective exhibition at the Scottish National Gallery. There was a small piece inside a room there that you could walk into, and you were surrounded by lines like this. I tried to photograph it with my phone, but it confused the phone. And frankly, it was just amazingly dizzying. You couldn't spend a lot of time in there. But it was an interesting experience. Another line network, hatching, is drawing a series of parallel lines to create shading effects. You see that in this Elizabeth Catlett print, that she uses a series of undulating parallel lines to create space, depth, and detail in this image. Or cross-hatching, a series of crossed parallel lines which aids the artist in creating depth, detail, or even accurate representation, as you see in this St. Louis, Missouri artist Tom Huck's linoleum cut print. The use of line can push the imagination. The scale of these Christo and Jean-Claude temporary drawings in nature are both monumental and engaging. And in this image, you can see the aerial photograph of their wrapped islands that are essentially wrapped with large scale, and here's a sample of floating material. They are essentially the performance of these drawn lines suggested in their original plans. Lines can simply and delicately render recognizable detail, as you see in this David Hockney drawing of his mother. They can reference different points in time, as you see the overlapping image of this woman from crouching to standing. We understand the movement and the connection between the two, and then the lines help us focus on one particular point. Implied lines exist in many works of art. These are lines that are not actually drawn, but connected or suggested by our brain. Star constellations, like the Big Dipper, are another example of that. We recognize those constellations because of the similar size and intensity of those stars, and we connect them in our brain, even though there's often many other stars within the range of a constellation, but we make connections based on visual associations. A more playful look at implied lines and connection is this Ken Josephson photograph. This is the pre-selfie period. He did a series of these in the 60s and 1970s where he held his arm out in front of his camera holding postcards that in one way or another connected or provided a disconnect from their backdrop. Lines can be used to express emotion. In this Arnulf Rainier piece, we see fear, anxiety, perhaps even the suggestion of death is implied through the use of these gestural, scribble-like lines drawn on the surface of a photograph. Lines are varied and have a multiplicity of uses in visual artwork. They are one of the foundations of works of art and one of the most important elements of design.